I started working at this family-owned Italian restaurant when I was 17, right after my family moved to this small town in Pennsylvania. My parents had divorced, and Mom wanted a fresh start away from the city. Being the new kid in a small town wasn't easy, but that restaurant became my second home. The place was gorgeous, all brick and wood, with this amazing outdoor waiting area featuring a pond with waterfalls. Inside it was always bustling with energy. I started as a dishwasher, but within 6 months, I was cross-trained on every station. The owners treated us like family, and my co-workers became my closest friends. We'd hang out after shifts, cover for each other during exams, and celebrate birthdays in the break room with leftover tiramisu. Everything changed when the original owners decided to retire and sold the place to this corporate restaurant group. They brought in this new general manager, this massive guy who walked around like he owned the place. Everyone called him Fat Andrew behind his back. And let me tell you, the nickname wasn't just about his size. This guy was bitter about life. He'd failed the physical fitness test to become a police officer multiple times, and now he was taking it out on everyone around him. From day one, he started making changes that made zero sense. He'd schedule servers for morning shifts when we didn't open until 4 p.m. or put our best cook on dishwashing duty during Friday dinner rush. When I asked him about being scheduled for 65 hours while still being in school, he just dismissed me, saying if I couldn't handle the hours, maybe I wasn't cut out for the industry. When I tried to bring up labor laws, he shut me down, telling me he didn't need a kid telling him how to run his restaurant. That's how every conversation went with him. He'd make these ridiculous decisions and then get defensive when anyone questioned them. One time, he scheduled 0 cooks for a Friday night, our busiest shift. When the kitchen staff pointed this out, he just shrugged and said they should be more flexible. The final straw came during finals week. When I brought up my time off request that I'd submitted 3 months in advance for studying, he immediately denied it. I reminded him that it had been initially approved, but he just flexed his authority, saying he was in charge now and if school was more important than work, maybe I should quit. When I explained these were my final exams that would determine my college acceptance, he coldly told me it wasn't his problem and that I was scheduled for doubles all week. That was it. I'd watched him drive away almost all my friends who worked there. The place that once felt like home now felt like a prison. So I decided to go out with a bang. On my last day, I waited until the pre-dinner prep was in full swing. The industrial dishwashers were running and the washing machine was loaded with kitchen linens. I took an entire jug of Blue Dawn dish soap and emptied it into both machines. These weren't your regular home appliances. These were massive industrial units that could flood the place if things went wrong. As the bubbles started building up, I casually gathered my things. The back of the kitchen was already starting to look like a foam party. But I wasn't done. On my way out, I stopped by that beautiful pond in the waiting area. I'd filled a large cup with more dish soap, and when no one was looking, I dumped it in. As I was walking out, he yelled after me, asking where I was going since my shift wasn't over. I simply told him to consider this my resignation and wished him good luck with finals week. I heard later from my friend who still worked there that the soap bubbles had completely taken over the kitchen. They had to shut down service right before the dinner rush. The health department had to be called in because there was so much soap residue everywhere. They couldn't serve food for 2 days while they deep cleaned everything. The pond? It turned into a massive bubble bath that took weeks to clean out. They had to drain it completely and refill it. Corporate came down for a surprise visit right in the middle of this chaos. They found out about his incompetent scheduling, the high turnover rate, and the various complaints from staff. And he got demoted to assistant manager at some fast food joint in the next town over. I moved to the United States from Brazil about 2 years ago to pursue my dreams of becoming a chef. My uncle owned a successful restaurant back home and I practically grew up in the kitchen. The smell of fresh herbs, the sizzle of the grill, and the satisfaction of seeing happy customers. That was my life. But dreams cost money, and culinary school isn't cheap. So I took a job as a waiter at this local restaurant to save up while improving my English. It wasn't fancy, just your typical family diner with decent food and regular customers. Most people were nice, or at least civil, until that day. It was a busy Saturday afternoon and I was covering extra tables because we were short-staffed. That's when she walked in with her son, who looked about 14 or 15. I approached their table with my usual smile, but the moment she saw me, her face twisted like she'd just smelled something rotten. She immediately started demanding a white waiter and told me to get out of her face. I stood there, frozen. In my 2 years of working here, I dealt with rude customers, but nothing like this. I went straight to my manager's office. I explained to him that Table 12 was refusing service from me because of my race. He just told me that times were tough and they couldn't afford to lose customers, so I should try to handle it professionally. When I tried to protest, he cut me off and told me it was final. Either handle it or clock out. Swallowing my pride, I returned to the table. I apologetically explained that I was the only waiter available at the moment. Her son suggested they leave since my kind worked there. She whispered something to her son, then turned to me with a sneer and demanded 2 Cokes and some chips in the most condescending tone possible. Her tone made my blood boil. Under my breath, I muttered, "Puta." Not loud enough for customers to hear, or so I thought. She immediately started screaming, demanding to know if I was American. When I told her I was from Brazil, she completely lost it. She jumped up from her seat, screaming at the top of her lungs that there was a dirty immigrant who was going to steal her money. Before I could process what was happening, she lunged at me, her fist connecting with my face. Her son used the distraction to grab the tips that had fallen from my apron pocket. Pure instinct took over, and I defended myself with 1 punch. There was a cracking sound and she dropped to the floor, unconscious. The son started crying out for his mom, begging someone to help. My manager burst out yelling and demanding to know what I was doing. That's when we heard the police sirens. 2 officers burst through the door. The first officer ordered me to put my hands where he could see them and demanded to know what happened. Stuttering, I explained about the attack and told them about the security cameras. The second officer checked the footage while the first one kept an eye on everyone. After reviewing the tapes, they handcuffed Karen, who had regained consciousness and was still trying to play victim. The second officer told her that she was under arrest for assault and attempted robbery, adding that her son would need to come with them regarding the stolen money. The first officer asked if I wanted to press charges, and I confirmed that I did. I turned to my manager, who was still standing there with his mouth open, and announced that I quit. I ripped off my apron and threw it on the nearest table. The case went to court, where Karen tried to countersue me for her broken nose. Her lawyer even tried to paint me as an aggressive immigrant who attacked an innocent American mother. But the security footage told the real story. She was found guilty of assault, attempted robbery, and filing a false police report. Her son was sentenced to community service. The local news picked up the story. A few restaurant owners in the area saw it, and one of them offered me a position as a line cook in his upscale restaurant. He said anyone who could keep their cool under that kind of pressure would be perfect in a professional kitchen. Now, 3 years later, I'm the sous chef at that same restaurant, and I'm halfway through culinary school. Before all this happened, I was living what many would call an alternative lifestyle. I spent 5 years traveling across the country in my beat-up van, following music festivals, doing odd jobs, and living off the grid. It wasn't a bad life, but after watching many of my fellow travelers spiral into addiction or worse, I decided it was time to grow up and join the real world. I picked a random state on the map, figured the universe would guide me right, and drove until I found a city that felt welcoming enough. My first apartment was a disaster waiting to happen, and happen it did. The ceiling literally exploded with water 1 week after I moved in. I was standing there, watching my few possessions get soaked when my new boss called. I'd found work with a small construction contractor through Craigslist. When I told him about my ceiling situation, he immediately played the hero. He told me his landlord had a place I could rent, and when I asked about the price, he said it was $500 a month, claiming it was a steal in this market. Hostile wasn't exactly the word I'd use when I saw the place. It was basically a glorified tool shed with a half-finished bathroom. But after years of living in a van and now dealing with a waterfall in my apartment, even this seemed like an upgrade. The landlord lived in the main house in front, and my boss had a pretty nice little two-bedroom place right next door to my shack. I didn't mind though. I'd learned to be content with less during my traveling years. I spent my free time fixing up the place, making it more livable. The landlord would often stop by to chat, and I helped her with yard work and small repairs. She was a tough but fair woman who reminded me of my grandmother. Straight shooting and no nonsense. Everything was going fine until my boss started acting sketchy about payday. He explained that an investment he'd made had gone south, and he couldn't pay me that week, but promised he'd pay next week for sure. I told him I understood, trying to be sympathetic. Another week passed, and still nothing. He just told me to hang in there, saying we'd finish the job next week and he'd pay me everything. When I mentioned needing to buy food, he walked to his kitchen and came back with some cans. He offered me corn and beans, like that would solve everything. By the third week of no pay, I was done being understanding. I confronted him about the thousands he owed me and told him I needed to pay rent. His face turned red and he exploded into a rant. He called me ungrateful, reminded me that he got me the place to live, and claimed he'd been nothing but good to me. He threatened that I could pack my stuff and leave if I came at him like that again, but then said he'd pay my rent for me, acting like he was doing me a huge favor. He finished by telling me to shut up and that he'd pay me when he paid me. That's when I decided to talk to the landlord. I figured she'd understand if I needed an extension while I found new work. I approached her carefully, apologizing for having to ask, and explained that I needed an extension on rent because the boss hadn't paid me in weeks. I've never seen someone's face change so fast. Her eyes narrowed and her jaw clenched. She exploded with rage about him being a no-good, selfish piece of garbage, saying she'd had it with him. She stormed past me before I could say anything else, screaming that he needed to get his stuff and get out. She declared that I would be moving into his place, and he could sleep in his truck for all she cared. I could hear them arguing for over an hour. The boss came to my shack that evening, slammed $600 on my table, and left without a word. 3 days later, he was gone, moved out completely. The landlord let me move into his old place, fully furnished, at a lower rent than what he was paying. Turns out the owner's been looking for a reason to evict him, and my situation was the last straw. I found a better paying job with a legitimate construction company the next week, and the boss? He was still trying to scam people 2 states over, but his reputation had followed him there. The landlord and I still keep in touch. She even helped me start my own small contracting business a few years later. This happened a few years ago when I was trying to find balance between running my business and having a life. My solution was simple: do what I love and share it with others. One of those things was free diving. There's this amazing spot in the Caribbean called Laguna Dudu. After visiting it the first time, I fell in love with the place and became a regular. The staff knew me so well that I was treated more like a friend than a guest. It's this beautiful location with underwater caves, natural pools, and a fascinating history involving ostriches. Yes, you read that right. On this day, I arrived early and set up my tent. I was getting ready for some dives, standing there with my wetsuit half on, when I noticed a woman and her daughter looking completely lost. I knew the staff didn't speak English, and the woman had that distinct "I don't speak Spanish" look about her. I called out to ask if she spoke English, and she confirmed with visible relief. When I mentioned that she looked lost, she explained that they had gotten separated from their tour group while trying to explore the place. She admitted to being unsure where anything was located. I offered to give them a tour, mentioning that I was heading down anyway and loved sharing my knowledge of the place. I crouched down to the little girl's height and asked if she'd like to see the Taino cave. Her eyes lit up like Christmas lights, and she gave her mom that universal "please mom" look that kids have mastered. Her mom just smiled and nodded. I spent the next hour showing them around, explaining how the place used to be farmland with ostriches before becoming a tourist spot. I told them about the underwater caverns, the natural pools, and all the little secrets I'd learned as a regular visitor. I shared some tips on how to best enjoy the different areas and eventually led them back to my tent where I needed to grab my flippers. That's when things got interesting. The woman expressed her profound gratitude for the tour, saying it had been incredibly helpful. She pulled out what looked like a $20 bill and held it out to me. I stammered in confusion before quickly explaining that I didn't work there and that payment wasn't necessary. I just enjoyed sharing my knowledge of the place. She insisted that I deserved it for being so nice to them, but I continued to refuse, explaining that I was just being myself. We went back and forth like this for a while until something changed in her expression. She got this determined look that said, "Challenge accepted." In one swift motion, she grabbed my right hand, shoved the 20 into it, closed my fingers around it, and, while still holding my hand, pulled out a $100 bill with her other hand. She delivered her ultimatum with unwavering conviction. Either I keep the 20 or she'd give me the 100 instead. She stared me down with this intense look, and I was completely stunned. Then, with the most satisfied smile I've ever seen, she declared, "That's what I thought would happen." Her daughter cheerfully called out a goodbye as they walked away, leaving me standing there in shock, still holding the 20. I couldn't process what had just happened. Did this woman just threaten me with more money? And did it actually work? To this day, I still laugh about how this woman won an argument by threatening me with excessive generosity. It's definitely not the typical entitled person story. She was entitled, all right, but in the most wholesome way possible. She was absolutely determined to thank me, and she wasn't taking no for an answer. Somewhere out there, there's a woman proudly telling the story of how she won an argument by threatening someone with a $100 bill. And honestly, I respect that power move.